There are video games that entertain, video games that challenge, video games that innovate, and then there are games that defy conventional categorization entirely. Unbeatable is one of the latter. A rhythm adventure hybrid constructed with an intentionally abrasive artistic identity, a grounding in emotional turbulence, and a confidence in its own vision that borders on defiance. It is a game about music in a world that fears music, expression in a world that rejects expression, and personal chaos in a world that demands control. And that core psychological tension permeates everything: the visuals, the soundtrack, the combat rhythms, the writing, and especially the protagonist beat. Unbeatable is not simply a rhythm title, it is an expressive object, a piece of artistic friction, a vehicle for anxiety, rebellion, performance, and unresolved memory. And for all its strengths, it is also a game that is not afraid to alienate the player through difficulty spikes, visual intensity, or narrative abstraction. Unbeatable's central concept is immediately striking. Music is illegal, not controversial, not regulated, illegal. This world building choice instantly reshapes how we interpret everything that follows. When a society criminalizes something as fundamental as music, it is no longer operating merely as a backdrop, it becomes an active force in the narrative. The illegality of music frames the entire emotional tone of the game. It becomes both metaphor and mechanism, implying themes of suppression, cultural censorship, authoritarian control, and the policing of creativity. But Unbeatable does not present its world with heavy exposition. Instead, it communicates through tone, through silence, through negative space, through the sense that everything Beatable does is inherently transgressive. Beatable plays music because she has to, not in a destiny laden sense, but because music is the only language she has to articulate the things she cannot speak aloud. This world mirrors Beatable internal struggle, chaotic, disjointed, contradictory, sometimes surreal, sometimes metaphorical, sometimes painfully literal. That interplay between external rules and internal rebellion forms the backbone of the entire experience. Unbeatable communicates emotion through contrast. Sharp, unapologetic contrast. Its aesthetic is defined by high contrast palettes, bold outlines, angular character motions, hand drawn expressive exaggeration, minimalistic color usage, rapid cut animation techniques, a sense of motion even when characters stand still. It feels like someone distilled the energy of rebellious illustrations, punk inspired animation, and emotional sketchbook fragments into a visual language. That language is perfectly suited to Beat because it is messy, imperfect, intense, and radiating with agitation. The limited palette is particularly effective. By narrowing colors, the game forces your focus toward motion and shape rather than detail. The result is an aesthetic that does not try to mimic reality. It externalizes emotional states. Scenes of conflict are sharp. Scenes of introspection are muted. Scenes of surrealism distort into dream logic. This aesthetic choice is a double-edged sword. On one hand, it is one of the most distinctive visual identities in any rhythm title. On the other, it sometimes sacrifices clarity for style. Enemy patterns, note timings, and spatial cues can be obscured due to contrast overload. Some players will embrace the chaos, others will find it overwhelming, or even visually fatiguing. But whether or not you enjoy the style, you cannot deny, Unbeatable looks like nothing else, and that uniqueness is part of its narrative toolkit. Let's shift into the mechanical design. Unbeatable uses a two-lane attack-dodge rhythm system, where incoming threats approach from the top or bottom of the screen. You respond by switching positions, timing hits, and managing the intensity of incoming patterns. It feels like a fusion of rhythm input, reaction time combat, and pattern memorization. Mechanically, Unbeatable is simple. Conceptually, it is deliberately disorienting. The game expects you to move by instinct, not by intellectual planning. Notes come fast, patterns overlap, inputs demand sharp directional changes. You enter short bursts of execution that feel like sprinting rather than dancing. This creates a physical sensation of intensity, tight chest, quick breaths, eyes locked on the screen. The game wants you to feel stressed because Beat is always stressed. Beat is not calm, polished, or in control, and the mechanics reflect that. However, there is a trade-off. Unbeatable's difficulty curve is steep. There is little middle ground between comfortably challenging and aggressively punishing. This reinforces the game's thematic design, but it also risks alienating more casual rhythm players. Where many rhythm games teach you through gradual onboarding, Unbeatable throws you into the deep end with the expectation that you will either swim or sink quickly. While this design choice fits the game's personality, but it does limit accessibility. No component of Unbeatable is more important than its music. The soundtrack is not merely background, it is the engine of every emotion, every battle, every moment of release. Songs are structured with almost cinematic pacing, building intensity through layered vocals, driving percussion, escalating tempos, and emotional crescendos that mirror beats' mental state. Musically, the influences range widely: Japanese rock, indie alternative, punk pop, emotional alt pop, anime OP and ED traditions, rock ballads with narrative arcs, chaotic energy reminiscent of live band sessions. The compositions are bold and deeply expressive. They serve gameplay, but they also serve narrative tone. Each track feels like a psychological landscape. However, the soundtrack is composed for difficulty. Many rhythm games design tracks around player clarity. Unbeatable designs them around emotional clarity. That means certain segments feel intentionally overwhelming. Layered vocals, roaring guitars, complex timing changes, and abrupt shifts in rhythm. For some players, this will be exhilarating. For others, it may feel like the music is actively resisting you, and that tension is deliberate. It mirrors the game's themes of internal contradictions. As a musical work, the soundtrack is brilliant. As a rhythm game soundtrack, it is occasionally at odds with readability. That complexity is artistic, but also inconsistent in its playability. Unbeatable's story is not linear, it is fragmented, emotional, internal. External events blur with dream logic. Characters speak with subtext. Scenes unfold with metaphorical layering. And Beat herself is the anchor holding all of this together. Beat is not a clean protagonist. She is raw, stubborn, closed off, emotionally overloaded, frequently unable to articulate her feelings. She lashes out, holds back, and contradicts herself. She is not a character designed to be liked. She is designed to be understood. The narrative explores artistic burnout, self-doubt, fear of failure, adolescent anxiety, trauma avoidance, creative pressure, interpersonal conflict, identity formation, the disorientation of growing up. The illegality of music serves as a metaphor for all the emotions Beat refuses to face. Music expresses what she cannot articulate. Music becomes danger because her feelings are dangerous to her, and the world responds to that danger by pushing back. The dream sequences are especially notable. They indulge surrealism, montage logic, and symbolic imagery, falling, shifting spaces, descending into impossible environments. These sequences echo the psychological language of anxiety and suppressed memory. The narrative can be too cryptic for some players' tastes. It rewards analysis and emotional literacy, but it requires patience and interpretation. Without that effort, scenes may feel disconnected or overly abstract. Nonetheless, for players who appreciate layered storytelling, Unbeatable delivers an unexpectedly deep examination of emotional self-sabotage and artistic pressure. The supporting cast is essential, not because of their depth individually, but because of how they reflect Beat's internal state. Barnmates push and pull at her, challenging her, supporting her, frustrating her. Each member represents a different emotional force: stability, rebellion, optimism, cynicism, support, avoidance. Dialogue is sharp, often sarcastic, occasionally vulnerable, frequently indirect. Relationships are messy, and the writing does not attempt to simplify those complexities. These characters are not caricatures, they are lived in, emotionally textured and flawed. They mirror the complicated friendships that form at transitional points in life, where everyone is just barely holding it together and trying not to drift apart. Unbeatable excels here. The characters feel real because they feel unresolved. Beyond narrative metaphor, Unbeatable's world blends mundane environments with surreal intrusions. Everyday locations are framed with exaggerated lighting or angles that transform them into emotional spaces rather than literal spaces. Streets distort, practice rooms stretch, classrooms feel claustrophobic, empty rooms feel cavernous. The environments reinforce Beaton's internal tension, unresolved trauma, surfacing, the dreamlike nature of memory, the anxiety of being watched or judged. Visually, everything reflects emotion. The world is not meant to be understood literally, it is meant to be felt, but again, that strength comes with a drawback. Sometimes the world feels too abstract to anchor narrative progression clearly. Scenes can feel metaphorically significant, but structurally ambiguous. Unbeatable's design is rooted in a philosophy of expressive friction. The game is not built to accommodate the player, it is built to confront the player. That does not mean hostility, it means vulnerability. The developers created something that prioritizes emotional authenticity, even at the expense of comfort. This game wants you to feel overwhelmed, to feel like you're falling behind, to feel like you're being pulled into Beat's anxiety, to feel like the world is too loud or too quiet at the wrong moments. The combat mechanics, soundtrack intensity, narrative abstraction, and visual overload all contribute to this sensation. It is a cohesive artistic direction executed with conviction. But cohesion does not always equal accessibility. Many of the game's sharpest critics point to lack of clarity, steep mechanical difficulty, emotional opacity, unclear progression, visual overload, inconsistent pacing. These issues are real, not deal breakers for many players, but real enough to affect the overall experience. Unbeatable's ambition is extraordinary, but ambition always carries risk. Let's analyze the major weaknesses. Mechanical difficulty and readability. Unbeatable is challenging in a way that often prioritizes theme over gameplay readability. Notes can overlap visually, patterns can become cluttered. The game seems to assume mastery early and escalate rapidly. This feels intentional, but also exclusionary. Narrative ambiguity. The story is emotionally rich but structurally fragmented. Without a willingness to infer, interpret, and analyze, many players may feel lost. Pacing issues. The game alternates between intense rhythm battles, slow dialogue segments, surreal interludes. These transitions can be jarring, affecting momentum. Visual overload. The extreme contrast aesthetic is beautiful, but can impair gameplay clarity and cause fatigue. Emotional barriers. Beat is intentionally difficult to empathize with at first. While this makes her feel real, it may deter players who prefer more approachable protagonists. None of these weaknesses are fatal, but collectively, they constrain the game's reach. Unbeatable is not a game trying to be universally loved. It is not trying to be mainstream. It is trying to be itself, without apology, without compromise, and without fear of alienating players who are not willing to engage with its emotional and stylistic intensity. Its strengths are extraordinary, a truly original visual identity, a fiercely expressive soundtrack, bold narrative themes, emotionally complex characters, deeply layered symbolisms, thematic cohesion across all systems. But its flaws are equally present, inconsistent readability, steep difficulty, narrative opacity, pacing irregularity, stylistic overload. In the balance of these factors, Unbeatable stands as a fascinating, ambitious, and often brilliant experience, one that hits emotionally harder than most rhythm games, but also trips on its own ambition more often than it should. For that, this concludes with a final score of 7 out of 10, a compelling, stylish, emotionally dense rhythm experience that achieves greatness in moments but falls short of mastery in its full composition. If you enjoyed this review, leave a like and subscribe for more gaming reviews. See you next time.